Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to show off a few things that are blooming here in the spring garden in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was going to fertilize the front garden as part of this video. I fertilized the back garden the other day, and I got another 50-pound bag I was going to throw out in the front and along the side over there, but it's drizzling this morning, and I just kind of wanted to point out that the way I throw the fertilizer out, I wouldn't do it when the leaves are wet because it'll stick to the plants. I like to do it when the leaves are dry and then there's rain coming afterward if I could. If not, then I'll water it in, keep the dogs off of it. But I wanted to get that done this morning leading up to the rain, and I just didn't get it done in time. But I will point that out. You should probably, using my technique of throwing the fertilizer out, you know, the instructions on the bag are either for covering amount of fertilizer covering an area. That's kind of the way I do it. I'm covering an area with the 50-pound bag. And then there's also instructions on individual plants. So if you're doing individual plants, you could still do that. I could still come underneath here and throw it underneath the plants. I just don't want to throw it over the top when the actual leaves are wet and that fertilizer is going to stick to them. Probably not as likely to do damage with an organic fertilizer with a small amount of nitrogen in it. But enough of a risk that I just don't want to do it, especially with open flowers like daffodils and other things. I don't want to be throwing fertilizer into those open flowers and open flowers on other things as well. This mountain snow Pieris continues to be a standout. The first year we put this in the ground, we didn't really realize this back line was as dry as it is, and there's just a lot of root competition. It's sandier back here for some reason. I don't know if soil got pushed back here at some point and changed it, but you can dig a long ways here and be in kind of a real sandy soil. So anyway, that combination of root competition and sandy soil, this thing dropped half its leaves and when we weren't paying attention to it. So it took a year for that to recover from that. And then last year it really kicked in and started growing, and we haven't had to think about it as much. You can see it's covered in these little bell-shaped dangling flowers, very similar to like a flower on a blueberry. Showy for a long time. These can really, they're earlier than most other leafy evergreen shrubs. Super cold hardy. A lot of these leafy evergreen shrubs aren't as cold hardy as these Pieris, but this one was selected for heat tolerance. And so it really holds up in our summer heat. And we had a tough summer last year and this thing didn't miss a beat. Once these, or as these flowers are fading, and again, they last a while, as they're fading, the new growth will start on this plant, and it's this beautiful red maroon color. And for weeks and weeks and weeks, it'll just be this red, almost bright ball back here. And I would imagine that finally, after having established it over this period of time, I think it's going to go from here to here really quickly this spring. So I'm looking forward to that. But it's a great plant. If you can find this mountain snow, you'll see temple bells, and I've covered both of them on the channel in the past, but this one was again selected specifically for heat tolerance. It's still just as cold tolerant, and it's a great looking plant. Obviously it has a lot of attributes, but if you're in the South, this is a good one for sure. Several other hellebores. We've been showing off a few hellebores in the garden, but this is Penny's Pink, continues to be a standout in the back garden. I would have shown it in a video maybe 6 weeks ago, cutting back the old foliage from around it as the new growth was happening on it. Now you can see this one's a good one because it's got the flowers stand up a little bit. They're not quite as nodding as some of the old varieties, but beyond the fact that this thing is blooming this beautifully and blooms for a long time, the foliage on this one's just spectacular. It's got this mottled foliage that will start to emerge from the base of this plant as the flowers start to fade on it, and it just looks great in the garden all through fall. In front of the hellebore, the pulmonaria has started blooming. This one's called Silver Bouquet. When I'm thinking about this dry back line back here, we've tried a lot of different perennials back here. There's hosta back here. Of course, hellebores and cast iron plants and rhodia are kind of known commodities for dry shade. So I know some things that will definitely grow in dry shade, but then we're experimenting with other things that will adapt back here. This pulmonaria hit the ground running 2 years ago, and it's bigger, better, fuller every spring. It's just waking up now, and it's already blooming in March. And once the flowers, this thing will bloom weeks and weeks and weeks, and then it'll get some new foliage in there and be double that width probably this spring. But it's been really, again, I think a lot of people are challenged with, we have two different, you know, shade is not all the same. You can have shade where you're having to irrigate or water or look for things that you don't have to water, and then wet shade spaces. And it's definitely two different types of plants for those two different types of spaces, but I highly recommend the pulmonaria if you have a dry shade space and you're looking for a perennial. One of the most talked about things in the garden last summer when we had the open garden was the Chinese mayapple still had a leaf big and tall on it. That one stays up in the garden a little bit longer, but we also have native mayapples, and they're up and racing ahead right now, racing up out of the ground. They don't always come up exactly where you planted them the year before, and I can see this one coming up in a few different spaces over here, but the spring ephemerals are a little later. Some of the spring ephemerals are a little later this year because the ground's just been cooler and it's been colder overall during the winter time, but mayapple jumping out of the ground, they'll bloom soon once those leaves completely unravel. You can't really tell what it's going to look like now, but it has this big giant leaves on them. There's native mayapples, and then again there's Asian varieties as well. And the Chinese mayapple, the leaves stay further into the summer. These are native mayapples, are hidden, you know, come up, bloom, and get out of the way real quick in the early spring. There's one other hellebore to talk about a little further down the line. Steph's going to move us down there. This one's called Blue Diamond, and there's Black Diamond as well, but this one has more of a bluish hue to it. Really pretty flowering hellebore. This one we bought as a very tiny plant like 2 years ago, and it's taken a little while for it to really take off in here, but you can see how nice it is this year, and it's spread a little bit over here to the path as well. So we're at some point, I think we're probably another year or so on some of these hellebores that are now about 3 years old. You know, we can pop these out of the ground and divide them a few times if we want to. Not quite there yet. They're not overcrowding themselves at this point, but that is a really nice, interesting, really dark blue or almost black flower on that one. As soon as we get a 70-degree week in the spring, loropetalums start blooming pretty quickly. Our big Carolina Midnight is budded up like crazy, but hadn't started opening any flowers, and our white flowering Emerald Snow is budded up like crazy, but isn't showing any color yet. But the Purple Daydream it's on its way. This one, you know, it's a pink, it's definitely a pink flower, but it edges toward red a little bit as well. But this thing will just be completely covered in those flowers in the next 3 or 4 days, as long as we don't get a heavy freeze on it. And then I'm gonna prune this one back just a bit at that time. This is a little taller than this is probably right at the height I'd like to keep it. And so in order to do that, I probably need to take it down about a foot, but we won't go across it, just flat top it at all or box it off. We'll go through here and selectively, this limb that's sticking up taller than everything else, we'll go down in the plant and cut that out and do the same thing on any of these vertical pieces in here. And after you finish cutting it, it'll still look loose, and it won't look like I've turned it into a boxwood, because I'm not trying to turn it into a boxwood. I like this kind of, you know, pointy, this kind of pointy, loose look that it has to it. But we'll show you that when it comes time to prune them. But this is one of those plants you prune after flowering. These super early spring flowering shrubs are definitely you prune after flowering. Again, I added that whole list to the Weekly Garden Planner. Those of you who own the Weekly Garden Planner, if you're wondering when to prune, I think there's 129 shrubs in that list, different shrubs. So loropetalum is just on there once. All the loropetalum are the same, but it says prune after flowering. In a video a little over a week ago, I planted this Ogon spirea on the edge of the north edge of the property, next to where the native garden is going to be. And I just wanted to show it off this morning. See, it's in full flower now. This thing just becomes absolutely covered up in flowers for, you know, it's not the longest blooming thing in the world, but that's okay. I mean, it's just beautiful, because as these flowers fade, all the foliage on this plant is a chartreuse color. Again, Ogon means yellow or golden in Japanese. So when you see that name on something, and again, I planted a gardenia with a similar name in a video the other day, but that chartreuse color will come out, you know, unfolding basically from underneath these flowers over the next week or two. Steph went around with the camera and took some B-roll of a lot of the daffodils and hyacinths and the other bulbicodiums and some of the other things that are in full flower right this minute. So here's a composite of all those things, because this garden is really waking up super, super fast. So there's some of the things that are blooming out here in the Raleigh Garden. This Barrett Browning daffodil is definitely the star of the bulbs right this minute. And we carried across, there's kind of a line of them out here. There's 3 groups of 3. So they were planted with the intent of creating kind of a ribbon across the front garden that's a little bit different than the way the path is laid out and that kind of thing. So if you back up from there, so they start over here, you know, it starts over here on the right and then carries across and then curves around this side over here. And so each of those little clumps, and again, so it creates a little curve within a curve out in the garden. So that's one design technique. And when I do consultations, sometimes I'll think about carrying something over hard surfaces. So if you have if you're planting in groups, carrying 1 or 3 of those across a hard surface to the other side. If you have a bed on one side of the driveway, carrying that bed to the other side of the driveway. Same thing on a sidewalk. Getting something that, again, these are going to come up, bloom, and be gone, but then we'll come in here with some sort of annual that creates some sort of shape through here as well. That's maybe different than the path itself, but it carries across, it carries across paths and across other objects that are in the garden, and creates some interest. And it also looks intentional. That's the other thing. It's about, creating, so where everybody says buy an odd number like 1 or 3 or 5 or 7, I might buy 8 and create a grouping of 5 and then a grouping of 3. somewhere else on the other side because it creates some intention in the design. The tulips that are at the entryway of this little path are not quite open, but they're starting to show a little bit of color here. I think it'll be another week or so here before they're really up, and they'll double in height here in the next week and then be in full bloom a week after that. Hopefully we don't get 80-degree temps, 85-degree temps on them. That's what tends to happen out here for us on tulips, is we just get them about perfect, and then 85 degrees will, one of those super abnormally early hot days will shut them down pretty quick. Some of the fragrant, what's the fragrant one here, Steph? Early Cheer. Early Cheer is probably the most fragrant of the daffodils we have out here. It's not the showiest, so we really haven't put it out here where you can like see it, but you can smell it. You can smell the daffodils that are fragrant out here. Same thing with the hyacinths. The hyacinths are showier. We have much better luck with the hyacinths this year because we had actual cold this winter. So our hyacinths have actually come back bigger, better, fuller, and they're planted in some fragrant daffodils too. So that's a big fragrant spot of color. And again, that stuff will die back. There's perennials here that will come up in their place, and I can already see perennials that are popping up through everything. Trying to be careful walking in the beds right now, and I'm filming some of these videos, and I'm like, this time of year it's really iffy on where things are. I can walk on them a month ago when they're well hidden under the ground. I don't want to be walking on them, but if I walk on them then, I'm not hurting them. But once they start to break the ground, especially some of these spring ephemerals that they're only up for a month or two, I definitely don't want to be walking on them. And I try, talked about it a bunch in the weekly garden planner, that the maintenance that you're doing this time of year, we want to get out invasive plants. We want to do some selective pruning, make sure our plants are not going to be hurt by other plants during the growing season, doing a little bit of pruning. And it's probably time for a lot of people to mulch. We're not going to mulch this year, but for a lot of folks, it's a good time of year to be mulching to prevent weeds from coming up in the next few weeks as well in these beds. Doing all of those things though, that traffic in and out of these beds can do some damage to things. So you got to also be careful at the same time. So just an awkward time of year. Typically it's wetter than it is. And it is just super dry out here. We have the threat of rain here for the next 48 hours, but if it's anything like what we've been having, it just won't be any kind of a real event. So as soon as this is passed, I'm going to get this front fertilized exactly like I did in the back. If you haven't seen that video from a few days ago, go back and look at that one. And then I've done videos in the past just on organic fertilizer, period. If you want to know why I use organic fertilizer and how I apply it every year. I tend to use less than the bag recommends, and I tend to just throw it out really quickly and be done and move on with my day. Most exciting thing coming in the garden is definitely the Indian hawthorn. Is going to pop here. Hopefully we don't get a freeze on any of these open flowers, because this is going to be absolutely spectacular. It looks like it survived an up and down winter, really warm November followed by a very cold December, and the buds are swelling and it's about to flower. And this thing, we've got these waves of fragrant things out here. So the Edgeworthy is finishing up back there. The fragrant daffodils and hyacinths have come on, and then the Edgeworthia will be next. And there's usually a series of kind of fragrant flowered things out here in the garden. It kind of probably ends with gardenias, in May and June. Lots of fragrance out here in the garden. Again, not necessarily my favorite thing, but if fragrance is important and fragrant flowers are important, you can layer these things seasonally so that you have something from very early right through the summer that has fragrant flowers out in the garden. And this will be the next one up for us in the next couple of weeks. So let us know down below what you have going on in your garden. I think the next few videos that you'll see from the garden here will be from the native garden. If you're following along with the native garden project, we have a lot of plants on the back patio that are ready to go in. I think we're going to plant 5 or 6 shrubs here in the next couple days in the ground out there. So that'll be one of the next videos from here in the Raleigh Garden. Thanks for watching.